Hi everyone, Peter here from Movement and Performance, and in this video today we're going to be talking about the use of jumping in the physical preparation training of athletes. So jumping is contested in its own sports in the athletics events of long jump, triple jump and high jump, whereby the athlete who jumps the longest or the highest respectively is the winner of that competition. So jumping is also a big part of many other sports such as basketball and volleyball, where jumping ability are going to dictate performance to quite a significant degree in these sports. So when we're talking about jumping in the physical preparation training of athletes, jumping exercises are going to be used as a method to develop power. This is because jumping by nature are explosive movements which are ballistic. This means that there's no deceleration phase once the athlete has left the ground. So once the athlete jumps, leaves the ground, there's no deceleration except for the forces of gravity. And this mimics some movements that we see in sports, such as sprinting and throwing, and also jumping. This is because we get basically that ballistic and explosive triple extension of the ankle, knee, and hip, which is successful to so many movements seen in other sports. So when we're performing jump training, we want to make sure that we have maximal effort each rep, because submaximal reps are not going to yield the same explosive, powerful benefits. So for that reason, we generally want lower volumes and lots of rest between each rep and each set. This is going to allow us to perform each rep with maximal intensity. So when we're talking about different types of jumps, we can categorize these into a few different categories. So firstly, we have force vectors, which is basically the direction of the jump. So we can have vertical jumps, such as a box jump. We can have horizontal jumps, such as a broad jump. And we can also have lateral jumps, such as some sort of lateral bound. We can also classify jumps based on velocity. So we can have fast versus slow jumps and everything else in between. So on the extreme end, we can have really fast contractions, such as something like a drop jump. And then we can have much slower contractions, such as a weighted box jump or a seated box jump. We can also classify based on the use of the stretch shortening cycle, similar to velocity. Generally, the faster the jump, the more contribution the stretch shortening cycle is going to have, whereas the slower the jump, the less of a stretch shortening cycle is going to contribute and the more muscular force will contribute. We can also employ jumps that have no stretch shortening cycles. This could be something like a seated box jump where we do a concentric only jump. So a fast type of jump that has a fast stretch shortening cycle component would be again something like a drop jump. A slow stretch shortening cycle might be a weighted box jump or just a counter movement box jump. And then an exercise with no stretch shortening cycle, as mentioned previously, could be something like a seated box jump, which is concentric only with no stretch shortening cycle contribution. And so the jump that we use, just like any other training means, is going to be context specific, which means it needs to be specific to the sport, the training phase, the athlete's preference, the athlete's limitations, equipment availability, and time availability. So the jump that we choose to implement in our training is generally going to go from a general to specific nature as we progress through the program. So the most specific type of jumps that we can use are generally ones that require high velocities and fast stretch shortening cycle involvements. And this is going to be typical of most sports. So for an example, we'll take sprinting, which is a common movement seen in many sports, especially team sports and field sports, where we have the most specific type of jumping exercise we can do for that is going to be a jump that involves very high velocities and very fast stretch shortening cycles, because it's going to be most similar to when we're sprinting. So we can use general jumps to potentiate specific jumps. That means we want to start off using more general jumps, which is going to actually enhance the subsequent specific jumps that we use later in the program. So for the same sprinting example we just used, we might use something like very slow vertical tight jumps and slowly transition that to more faster jumps with more stretch shortening cycle contribution, and also in a horizontal direction. So the problem is that most sports aren't simply just sprinting sports. Most team sports are going to have requirements for both vertical and horizontal jump training, which means that we might just then progress the velocities and the stretch shortening cycle contribution. So we might start with both horizontal and vertical slower type jumps and progress that to faster horizontal and vertical type jumps with more stretch shortening cycle contributions towards the latter end of the training phase. So jumping in general is quite a specific training tool that we can use. So another way we can program this to actually peak our athletes is going to be used to use general power training, such as Olympic lifting and implement throws, and then that can be the potentiation for the future jump training that we're going to transition to in subsequent phases. So just a final note, that jumping is going to be a great tool to develop power. However, it's probably not a good idea for conditioning for the following reasons. The reason we use jumping is to develop power, which means that we need maximal intensity on each rep. So if we start using it for conditioning purposes, which means we have to do multiple reps, we may reduce the movement quality and also reduce the power output. And this is also, it may potentially be unsafe if we're using hard boxes to jump on. One error under fatigue could cause actually injury to the athlete. So make sure when you're implementing jump training into your programs, use rationale and logic, and make sure you fit it into the yearly training plan. Don't just throw it in because you see it somewhere. So thanks for watching, guys. Hopefully you got something out of this video. And if you like this informative content, you can follow Movement and Performance on Instagram and Facebook for more. On those platforms, you'll find the latest research made into simple infographics, which are understandable and easy to read. And you'll also find training footage of a range of different athletes. Thanks for watching.